nevertheless I have no choice. And the other point is that I'm really Latino-Americanist in my research activities, so I know about my own country so much that everybody who considers himself a cultured citizen should know. One way or the other, working here as a sociologist, I must know something about nature of the processes which are taking place in Poland.
Shall we do that?
Probably there was some idea at the beginning that there must be some similarity between the processes in Chile and in Poland. We are two countries separated by enormous distance. But probably we could have something in common, but not precisely when we consider the processes of transformation. In Chile, the transformation was profoundly and predominantly political one. At the same time, Polish transformation was both political and socio-economic, and probably the second was much more important than the first one. The ex-socialist state of the Polish People's Republic has left a quite good institutional framework for the development of different administrative and political processes, and I could prolong this over this point. But the tasks oriented to the economic transformation have been enormous. Enormous because it was necessary to make some very important steps in a very short time and all together. I would just mention three of such steps. First was the privatization of the economy, not necessarily reprivatization, just for the knowledge of all the present. I would like to stress upon the very important fact that there was never public agreement, majoritarian public agreement in Poland for the task of reprivatization. We don't have a law concerning overall reprivatization. I mean, no, the majority doesn't question some fundamental reforms of the very beginning of the People's Poland from the year 44. That was agricultural reform, which was practically quitting of the private property over the size of 50 hectares in western Poland and 100 hectares in the East Poland. And the second of these reforms, the nationalization of industries of the year 46, which was also not questioned, where there was possibility and agreement to pass it into the private hands, but through the process of selling it, making it lease and so on, but not through the abolishing of the reforms from the years 40s yet. The second task was downsizing of the heavy industries, something what sociologists sometimes call the processes of desindustrialization. They have happened in the Western Europe, but usually have taken about 20 years. In Germany, in Great Britain, in Poland it had to be done in 1, 2, 3 years. So you can imagine the size of the processes which were to take place, and probably the third task would be the reorientation of the foreign markets. Heavy industries, especially in the People's Poland from before 1989, have been producing a lot for the eastern countries, especially for Soviet Union. I mean, for instance, the production of shipyards in Poland, where the biggest part of the production was contracted to the Soviet enterprise. At the beginning of 90s, what was left from the Soviet Union or the Russia, they simply didn't have money to pay this production. So they arose the very imperious necessity to reorientation of the production and international commercial relations. So to do all this in a very short time, it was an enormous task. That is why, in difference to what my Chilean counterpart, Professor Valdivieso, has said, I start from the conviction that we have really three views of the Poland past, three complete different works which are seen by the public opinion in Poland, and not just so little as Professor Valdivieso mentioned in the case of Chile, that there are two cultures just competing between themselves. I think we have really three different works which are seen. Well, so I stated here in that incipient paper of mine that there are nowadays three visions of the past, more remote and more recent and immediate. The first two comprise the years of so-called real socialism, society of the central planning, or despotic socialism, as Leszek Kolakowski once called it, state capitalism, or simply the communist system. The first vision refers to the best period, early 70s, time related in the public meaning with the governance of Edward Gierek. It's a long time that has passed since. The people who remember the relative qualities of the period must have 50, 60 years more or less like now. So their opinions are still present in interviews, in all the investigations that may take place. I say here that there are regions in Poland where many grown-ups remember overall betterment of the conditions of living and the modernization of Polish industries of the time, of the 70s. This vision gradually is becoming more and more opaque as the time passes and the number of the people with this experience of the time diminishes. The second vision of the recent history of Poland comprises the years of 80s, which start with the short time of the Solidarity upheaval and then with the profound economic crisis and the state of war finally declared by the government of Wojciech Jaruzelski. The main issues of the black history of the state socialism refer mainly to this period. And finally we have the actual story of Poland, which after the transformation is initiated in 1989 comprise already the bigger part of the history, 20 years. There are two periods of 10 years and right now we have the period of 20 years. I mean the most powerful generation which is now living in the society, the people who are in their 40s, the beginning of the 40s, they have only the experience taken from the last period of the transformation which started in 1989. The initial period of the transformation was a hard one. From the political point of view, sociologists often speak of the initial honeymoon of the transformation. Living conditions worsened, but the people seemed to be hypnotized by the overwhelming atmosphere of generalized freedom. But the economic realities were quite harsh. The transformation corresponded to the model of the Big Bang, as sometimes economists called it, or Naomi Klein calls it now shock therapy. So the gross national product descended in the first 2 years about 20%. Industrial production descended in 25%. Real wages descended in 36%. Income of the farmers even up to 50% in the first 2-3 years of the transformation. One could say that all the elements of the famous Washington Consensus were observed at the time, that Poland was following the path indicated not so much by our German neighbors, I mean social economics of the market, neither the example of Scandinavian countries, of Sweden and Denmark. More or less it was a path indicated by the American capitalism. And at the very beginning it was very clear. The transformation was that way initiated in Poland by the 11 bills, parliamentary bills, which came out of the parliament at the end of 1989 and together formed the core of the so-called reform of Balcerowicz. And in the paper which you were given, there are some data concerning what has happened to the wages, what has happened to other remunerations, what has happened to farmers' income, and to the income of the enterprises out of agriculture, which in 4 years, from 1989 to 1993, have increased their participation in the national income from the 7.2% of the national income to the 17.5% of the national income. How the people did and do perceive these changes? There is enormous quantity of material to work with. First of all, there are all the nowadays publications because of the 20th anniversary of the transformation and the 20th anniversary of the independent Poland. Apart from the national, to denominate them somehow, publications, there finally appear also books published by foreign writers who, after spending a long time to learn Polish and to have access to the primary sources, start to write and publish. And even there are open possibilities for them to mention questions and things which are difficult to mention for the Polish also, because of internal censorship, moral censorship. You can't be a Pole, you can't write bad about solidarity experience, and an American can do it with the best intentions and the best knowledge which he could acquire. So, David Ost, exactly. David Ost, and recently also Marcy Shore, who has published the book Caviar and Ashes about the collaboration of Polish intellectuals with the communist regime, or Felix Gross with his books concerning different forms of anti-Semitism in Poland. Also, a thing very difficult to write about for a Pole living in Poland, but very open and with very fruitful consequences for everybody, for the people who live abroad. Between different sources, I would like to mention 2 of them. The first is the Center for the Study of Social Opinion, CBOS, which existed before and was recreated as a public endowment by the Parliament and is receiving public subvention to meet its public statutory obligations. The CBOS publishes annually several hundred reports which can be accessed for free in the net. Also, some of them are translated to English. The other source is very detailed and extremely refined, just not to say sophisticated, study of the Polish conditions of life and the corresponding forms of social consciousness, which are published each 2 or 3 years under the title Social Diagnosis. The recent one comes from the year 2007 by the group of investigators headed by Janusz Czapliński and Tomasz Palak. The reliability of social diagnosis is much better, much higher, because they are using the best team of field workers belonging to the General Statistical Office, and they employ where possible the method of panel study, and they are working with a population surpassing 14,000 respondents, 14,000 people. At the same time, the CBOS is working with a sample of samples not surpassing 1,000. Sometimes it's only 600. So the difference is enormous. In the opinion of the team working on social diagnosis in 2007, they state that the great changes symbolized by the year 1989 had much significance for all people, those who have gained and who had lost. With the flow of time, the appraisal of the change is changing too, and this appraisal is not based exclusively on the one's own observation and experience, it's also inherited. So some people maintain the opinions concerning the people's Poland from before 1989, having no personal knowledge because of the atmosphere, because of the thinking of his parents. And so the opinion is going, trespassing through different generations and coming to the younger ones. In the opinion of the relative majority, and remember that it was 2 years ago, was that the reforms of 1989 were not good in the sense of non-efficient or different than expected, as opposed to the minority of 10.4 who maintained that these reforms were good. This opinion is very strongly with the reference to the age category, income, education, place of inhabitants at area. An analysis of data reveals that the positive appraisal depends on the two independent factors: own experience of the interviewee and the political value attached to the democracy considered as a good system. And the situation, says the authors, has remained basically the same during the last 10 years. Reports of the CBOS are much more optimistic, but nevertheless they are also describing the phenomenon of the small margin. I mentioned it in some part in here, of the small margin of the people who consider that there is nothing good to mention in the last 20 years, and those who say that nothing has changed to the better, or that is difficult to say. Altogether, it makes 20 to 25% who do not accept the changes. The changes which has occurred can be divided into two groups. The first ones concern the fields where most people think that the situation has changed to be better, much better sometimes. As factor analysis was made on the data offered by CBOS, it resulted that all the aspects related to the general image of Poland have been much better than before. But many factors which have been related to the two other factors, which are called interpersonal relations and social care and social policy, so the opinion was rather negative. So what was considered to be more negative than before? The spheres of public safety, social security, public health care, interpersonal relations, religiosity, intensity of informal relations, family relations, personal honesty, and level of criminality. In these fields, public opinion as investigated shows the situation of decrease in the levels which have been before obtained. Well, in the written text, I offer also some information about what was the thinking about the democratic process in Poland. I would say that here it is where most similarity between Chile and Poland happens. I mean, the majority of people is in favor of democracy, but the minority thinks that the democracy works well, about 30-something percent, and further on that in certain moments it could come to more to 50% of the people responding that in certain circumstances the governance by the strong hand could be more desirable or could be better than democratic measures of government. So there's probably where the data from Chile and from Poland, with all the differences which I mentioned before, make coincidence. From that point of view, further on, we have really two Polands. I mean, if we consider democracy not only as a set of certain formal procedures, but also everyday practice of the people living in the country, So there is clear division between the people who know and make use of the democratic rights comprised in the tripartite conception of citizenship of Marshall, and those who are unable to use all the opportunities offered by the democratic procedures. It means that these are the people best educated, living in great towns, having greater income. These are who use all the opportunities offered by the democratic procedures. And all the others seem sometimes to be quite out of those procedures. Well, taking into consideration that phenomenon that 20 years of the transformation, I think at the end that the political, economic and social transformation of Poland seems to be a success. Even if we have a crisis, as you probably know from the different publications and data and so on, Poland is not suffering so much the actual financial crisis as many neighbor countries, also strong countries, as for instance Germany. Who knows what will develop in the recent future, but for the time being, the opinions of the people do not change, and they really became optimistic starting 5 years ago with the entrance of Poland to European Union. Let it also be in the future. So that was.
Thank you for that. Okay, thank you very much. Yes, let's have plenty of time, so I'll open it up for questions and comments. Peter?
My name is Peter Smith. I'm from the University of California, San Diego, and I speak from nearly complete ignorance on these issues, so my questions will be naive. What strikes me is the difference in the agenda of the recollection of the past in the two countries. That in the case of Poland, it appears to be more the workings of the political system, whereas in the case of Chile, with a concern about human rights, it's more the nature of the political system. So one question I'd like to ask you, sir, has to do with the background of the agenda. Is there a thought in Poland that whatever repression there occurred was imposed from the outside, and therefore it's not a matter of Polish recollection, but it was kind of forced from the outside, and therefore it's a different situation than in Chile, where clearly Pinochet was a Chilean construct. So that's really a question. I might say parenthetically that I think the levels of support for democracy that you cite, although they show increases by international standards, are not very high, so that you have the two cultures that you mentioned. But I think it would be, my question about that is there a nostalgia for the past among that culture that appreciates, the possibility of authoritarianism? Is there a sense that it was better in some golden age of the past, or is it simply a dissatisfaction with the present? And in the case of Chile, Patricio, my question has to do with recollections of the Chilean right, which was 45% at the time of the plebiscite in 1988 that voted to continue Pinochet, that in recent elections the right-wing candidates have been nearly winning the presidency. So my question is, what is their attitude? How do they explain Pinochet? Is it that Pinochet was a terrible thing and it never should have happened and we're sorry? Or is it more, it was a regrettable but necessary stage? Mm-hmm. That it had to happen, it's a good thing that it happened, it's a good thing that it's over, mm-hmm. We're not going to do it again, mm-hmm. But a kind of justification of the mm-hmm. past that in some ways allows them to accept Pinochet at that period, but to reject a similar solution for Chile now. Mm-hmm. Question mark.
Should we take answers to this rather than
immediately?
We have plenty of time, so would you like to respond on the Polish side?
Yes, but in a short form. Well, there are two things. First of all, Poles are very patriotic, nationalistic. Sometimes it means that everything bad in the history could come only from abroad. So we were unable to develop for our own account systems that would be democratic. So probably that way of thinking persists. But if these people dissatisfied with the changes, whether they come to certain phenomenon of disenchantment, desencanto as they call it in Spanish, or they are feeling totalitarian, post-totalitarian nostalgia. I wouldn't say it goes so far. Very characteristic in the research made by CBOS, there were usually two questions. The first, whether the respondents considered good to the former time and so on, and the other, if they personally would like to live again in the real socialism. So the difference was the double. 30% thought that, something like 30% thought that certain development, certain characteristics of the past were better, but not more than some 13% would like to revert to the past, to go back to the history and to live in the real socialism. So I won't say that's totalitarian nostalgia. It would be too much.
Well, to answer your very complex question, in 88, 54% of the people, of the citizens of Chile, wanted no more Pinochet 8 years, but we have the other 46%. They supported Pinochet. We don't know if they supported Pinochet or not, because that was a plebiscite, you know. And in the plebiscite, that was a plebiscite in an authoritarian regime. So there were not many possibilities. Yes or no? Yes or no for Pinochet? But that didn't express probably the desires of all actors in the society. But then with the re-democratization in Chile, came this report of Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and between 1992 and 98, there were more people who understood that Chile didn't have a paradise before the military government, but in any case that was a justification for the human rights violations of the time of the government of the junta and Pinochet. And in the time of democracy began to come more informations to the country. Before, the country was isolated 70 years without informations. But since 73, there were many movements against the human rights violations in Chile and against the governments in Chile. In Europe, Helsinki, for example, 73, 74, many in the US, there were pressures for the democratization of Chile. Several important organizations like Amnesty International with their reports, but this information came later to Chile in the time of the democracy, and many moderate people began to change because they didn't have conscience about the real situation of the human rights in Chile. Because another important thing is that Chile had, in the time of the military regime, two phases. The first phase was between 73, 79. 73, 79, the junta, the government, controlled with terror. nobody had the possibility to be in the opposition. If somebody were in the opposition, the people were in the opposition, the possibilities to disappear were very high. So nobody wanted that. And there were not nothing of criticism, and the informations from outside came, but nobody talked about that. And the second moment was in the 80s. In the 80s, at the beginning of the 80s, began because the economic debt crisis in Chile and the consequences, social consequences, fiscal consequences, and in the economy, began malestar, the population began to protest against that. And in this context, and with the international pressure, began the openness of the government. But many informations came after that, in the 90s. And I think the many symbolic facts, for example, that Erwin presented in the TV, in the media have impact, always more impact in the people in Chile, not only in domestic issues, too in international issues. The president of Chile, with the power, recognized that the past of Chile was black in the human rights issues. That, well, Erwin was moderate for many people, and Erwin recognized the president, and Erwin had a legitimacy of many people, and then the Congress did recognize, and the moderate people began to change, and with the events in '98 came probably the most important change from outside, not inside Chile, from outside Chile. This input was important. For example, Chile is a very legalist country. The people believe that the institutions are really important. The justice, the Supreme Court, for example, and the Supreme Court systematic denied the possibility to bring to trials militaries because the amnesty law of '78 in Chile. But after Pinochet case in London,
I have at least two other people.
I'm very sorry.
If you find out the answer, I'm not saying stop this instant, but if you want to just round it out with a final.
Okay,
comment.
short.
Yeah?
Only
Quickly.
with this issue, the Supreme Court changed the doctrine. They said, okay, we have this amnesty law of '78, but important is that this law is nothing in relation with the universal principle of disappearances are criminal acts, and we have to search for disappearances in Chile, and that is of course a principle in the United Nations. So these facts began to exercise influence in the conscience of many Chilean people, and only the extreme rights defended. And important was that change the conscience of the past, because in the time of the plebiscite, and that is the last comment, 88, in the time of the plebiscite, the last, many people thought, no, but in the time of Allende, in the time of Frei, everybody were very bad people. So we had Pinochet. Pinochet signified order, progress, economy, etc., etc., etc. From '98, nobody talked more with this argument.
Right.
Thank you very much.
People want to ask questions, so
Thank you.
5 people want to ask questions. So I'll take them. I don't know if these questions hang together. I'll take them in 2 pairs, just to speed up. Yeah. So first Richard, and then Carl, and then I have 2, possibly 3. So let's take the first 2.
I suggest that we stick to the main topic of the conference a little bit more, because the descriptive side is extremely dramatic interesting that it will go without end if you allow Poles to speak about Poland and Chile. So, external factors. To what extent external factors may be held responsible for anything, for the internal dynamics of a major social change? That's an extremely interesting point. Although there are people in any country who would blame the foreigners, the others, and so on and so on. For instance, in the Polish historiography, we have two schools, the Krakow and Warsaw School, one of them blaming the foreigners for partition of Poland, and the other one saying that it were the Poles themselves who were unable to govern themselves properly, and therefore they should be blamed responsible for the disaster that happened. Now, closer to the point we are under consideration right now. What is the external frame of reference here? The Soviet Union and the United States. If we compare Poland and Chile, in Poland, we have to think about the dismantling, the dependency domination link, or intertwining, or entrelazamiento, as the Spanish colleagues would say, or in your language. So that's one thing. In the Chilean case, that's not the story at all. So what is the practical implication? A lot of them. I will point out, for want of time, only one. How about the responsible of security, military intelligence, and so on and so on. In Chile, nothing happened. And in Poland, they exaggerate. So you see, it is psychologically understandable, because this is the social reaction to what happened. But the very fact that you are able in one country to link the internal dynamics to the externality of your position in the world system or global system, whatever you call it, and in the other case, you simply sweep it under the carpet for tactical reasons, means that transformation will last for generations in Chile, and in Poland is going quite faster. Well, I could write a book on that. We have the German, but we have the German here, so I'm not going to. Important implications of that. The external factor is important.
Carl? Do write a book, please. First, on Michael Szmara's article. Sometimes I don't understand the figures. For example, on page 3 at the end, some 60% of the Poles consider a free market economy as best. And then you say, in 2006, only 1/3 of the population was in favor of capitalism. I'm a bit, lost. There are other figures too. But what strikes me and what puzzles me politically also, in Poland, it seems the general satisfaction with the transition is higher than, and Poland, as you said, is following a neoliberal approach, is higher than in Germany with the social market system and its safety net. Because the East Germans, I do not think they reach the percentages of satisfaction as in Poland. Yeah? This puzzles me, but maybe the explanation is East Germans are Germans.
That is what I would say.
Coming to Valdivieso, I think it's worth underlining something. Chile, as a transition country, has been a norm-setting country. This is little known. It was Chile, together with Argentina, who asked us, EU, in the first agreement after 19, to enter a human rights clause, allowing the suspension of the treaty, of the agreement. That's an external factor, exactly. And Chile set an international, in a way, helped to set international norms, because this clause is now standard, obligatory in any agreement beyond pure trade agreements of the EU. Second, the High Court in London, in the same line, set international standards by, for the first time, saying in one single sentence, it is not good enough to be a state representative and then to believe you're immune. They said it is not among the statesmen's functions to torture its own people. Point.
He was senator of Chile.
Yeah. Okay, I'm struck by something, and I would like to see comparisons with Poland to cover our topic. In Chile, obviously, there's a strong resistance against consulting the civil society in building all this process. I wonder how the situation in Poland would be qualified. Of course, in a way, Solidarność is a civil society organization, but it is more and it is less. The general problem is, of course, how do you fix criteria for who is civil society, who selects, and how representative are those who represent the civil society. We regularly in negotiations have this problem with Andean or indigenous social societies sitting next door influencing, but how representative are they? That's a general discussion. Well, that's for a moment all. Thank you.
I'm inclined to try the next two questions and then give the speakers a chance to respond to several. So I have Colin and Carlos.
A very short question to my neighbor.
Yeah, add your question as well. Okay.
It is very simple question. What will the attitude of the contemporary, in any case after 98, strong the right in Chile towards Pinochet? What is contemporary attitude?
Ethical?
Ethical, political, in any case, they must be asked what you think about Pinochet. And what they answer given. And one comment. I suppose that we should take into consideration two consensus. One consensus of the beginning of the 90s, or rather end of the 80s, Washington consensus, and Beijing consensus of the beginning of this century. It is a question of capitalism, of what capitalism, and so on and so on. Thank you.
Colin?
Okay, Colin Lewis, London School of Economics. We've been presented with pictures of two very different transitions, yes? In the Polish case, something that was abrupt and multifaceted, involving political change, but much more, particularly as you said, in the socio-economic sphere. In the Chilean case, we've heard of a transition that was much more extended, much more extenuated perhaps, and was largely associated with political change, with much less emphasis on the economic and the social. So, two questions in that sense. What do the outcomes tell us about
the major parties to that sort of social pact, social treaty, that changes will take place in a gradual way? And they did. To the effect nowadays, I would say the people from the old machinery in diplomacy are hardly being seen at all. Also owing to the fact that biology is at work. So a combination of different various factors were there, and that was not, my own view is that was not the major obstacle in shaping foreign policy. Rather, the domestic and lack of firm decision-making process would have a welcome influence on setting up some secondary measures, because in terms of the specific choice, NATO membership and the EU membership were also an outcome of a general consensus of all major parties since the end of 1993. So even from the beginning of 1993, even before the elections, when the so-called left, whatever that means, came back to power. So actually it was not a dramatic thing. But in security, both civil security status and intelligence status, military intelligence, that was more dramatic, and particularly so that it was also used for political aims. So it was a combination of something reasonable and something which was inevitable in under any conditions of a major upheaval.
With a coincidence with the replacement of the generations, even. So, for instance, in diplomatic service, it was for one term. They have been called people who didn't work in diplomacy before. I could call some examples. British ambassador of
These
Britain,
were political appointments.
Orion Kieniewicz in Spain, and so on, so on. And after one term, being ambassadors, they have been already replaced by the professional team, but yeah, coming already from the younger generations.
First of all, the remarks of Richard about the external factors, Soviet Union in Poland, really important, and United States in the case of Latin America, and Chile in particular, really important. The intervention, systematic intervention in the time of the Cold War was a factor. We talked other day about the Camelot Research Project in the 65. There we are concerned in the governments of Latin America and Chile in particular because the Department of Defense of the US government began with the research about the internal conditions for a civil war in 65. And in 65 came to the government Eduardo Frei Montalva. We had a very stable democratic system in Chile. And then came the many actions and interventions. We know the history. Influence was important not only with regard to the opposition to the Links and Communists, but with the return of the democracy was really important. The government of the USA. And in relation, I go fast, in relation to the question of Karl Bach, I think it's it's complex, the question, but the question about civil society, I don't believe we have something like civil society, something one object. We have indicators of civil society, public opinion, media, votes, electoral processes, and networks, organizations, lobby groups, and these worked inside the countries and outside the countries. In this time of globalization, internationalizations, and that was really important for the topic of human rights in Chile, because there were ties between organizations in Chile and organizations in Europe, in the US, etc. And the organizations of Chile did receive support during the time of the military government. And that was really important, for example, to prepare the documentations about the violations of human rights in Chile. But the question about what is civil society is really difficult. I'm very conductist in my mining. I think we could talk about how is public opinion if we measure the public opinion, or if we measure the influence of the media, the television, etc., or if we have the results of the electoral processes. And in Chile we have 3 governments of the consultation. So that is one indicator about the civil society. With regard to the remarks of Lewin Collin, I would like to ask more about the second, because the first aspect is about civil society, but the second about institutional, maybe you can explain more.
The organization in Poland, not only in Poland, you know, the dissatisfaction with political parties is prevalent. We have quite well developed territorial self-government, and which is very often, I would say, misanalyzed by political scientists because they are accustomed to interpret the election results in terms of political parties. But when I counted what is the share of mandates at the local level elected from the lists of political parties, I discovered is about 28%. Well, most of the mandates are taken by people who are elected by, well, the local coalitions, I call them quasi-parties, you know, etc. If you ask for who is ruling Polish towns, of course in large cities, perhaps not in Krakow. The man in Krakow we're going to see, is he elected from the party list? Perhaps even not him. You know, in quite important Polish city, but, well, 80 or more % of those heads of localities are non-party politicians. Well, that's something that shows you, well, a problem which, well, of course could be called Polish problem, though I do not believe so. I think it's just a reflection of a general problem with democracy in Europe. Well, I overheard the name which starts of a European politician which starts with initial B on the train. Well, it's a good case of how today's politics in so-called consolidated democracies in EU look like. Well, and I think it's all the same disease, which is a crisis of concept of political representation. Well, and how many minutes left?
About half a minute.
Okay. I was raised in old regime with a cult of Giovanni Sartori. Since 1989, I'm every second paper I quarrel with Sartori. I think it's a totally outmoded way of seeing the politics, which is not when he criticizes Berlusconi, of course, but when he says his principle that parliamentarian representation is a crown jewel of democracy because the parliamentarians have expertise, are professionals, are better, have better knowledge, are more competent than the electorate. I think it's to be forgotten. I think it's totally different society, not only in Poland, but all over the world, perhaps, where we should invent a new role for parliamentarians, and not to think how to teach our nations to approve the old parliamentarian system again.
Thank you very much. Well, we'll move on to Peter Smith, Democratization in Latin America.